Hi, everyone. This is Sam Silverman, Managing Partner of EB-5AN. Thank you for taking time to join us on today's webinar. Today, we're going to be speaking about partial EB-5 investments, particularly before April 1st, when there's an $8,000 USCIS fee increase for filing a new EB-5 I-526E petition. And a partial investment is going to be a filing where you're starting with less than the required total $800,000 at the start, and then committing to fund the balance within a specific period of time. During the webinar, if you have any questions, please use the chat box on your screen, and we'll try and cover as many questions as we can at the end of the webinar. If you want a copy of the slides, you can email us at info@eb5an.com, and we'll be happy to provide a copy of the slides. Okay, here's a quick table of contents of what we're going to cover today. We'll talk a little bit about EB-5AN. We'll chat about our guest panelists. We'll talk about how does a partial investment of choosing to do a partial investment. We'll talk about some pros and cons. We'll talk about what you need to get started if you're interested in trying to do an EB-5 application before the fee increase happens. And then we'll spend a few minutes at the end talking about a few current urban and rural TEA projects that we have currently available. So a little bit about EB-5AN. We're a leading national EB-5 investment fund and regional center operator. We've been in this space for more than 10 years. We've worked with thousands of EB-5 investors from many countries around the world. This is a map showing where many of those countries are. We're the only regional center that covers the entire continental United States, which means we can be very selective about which projects we choose to take on anywhere around the country, which is particularly important now that the rules provide substantial advantages to projects located in rural areas. As I mentioned earlier, I'm Sam Silverman, one of the two managing partners, and joined with my partner, Mike, who's also with us today. And I'll let Mike jump in, introduce himself, and share a little bit about kind of the evolution of our firm.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for spending some time today. We know there's a lot of questions on the ability to do partial filings before these fees increase, so we're excited you're joining us. So as Sam mentioned, the two of us founded EB-5AN over 10 years ago. We were both more from the institutional side of the world, working at the Boston Consulting Group, and then I was in private equity after that. And what we've tried to do is bring that institutional knowledge and transparency to the EB-5 space. And over the past 10 years, we've grown into one of the leading players, working with over 2,000 EB-5 investors across our regional centers, and have a great reputation on the transparency that we provide.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Mike. All right, so now we'll spend a couple minutes and introduce both of our guest panelists. They're both EB-5 rockstar immigration and securities attorneys who've been in this space for many, many years. So Kate, would you like to start? Share a little bit about your bio, background, Greenberg Traurig, and your experience in the EB-5 space, and also what you're seeing in the market today with respect to investors, and their interest in doing a partial filing too.
Sure. Thank you. So my name is Kate Kalmakov. I co-chair the Global Immigration and Compliance Practice at Greenberg Traurig. Greenberg Traurig is one of the largest law firms in the world. We have 2,750 attorneys in 47 locations. I'm based in New York and New Jersey, and our immigration group has over 150 staff members. We have over 20 years experience in doing EB-5 petitions for thousands of investors. And we also work with projects to help them structure regional centers, to do EB-5 capital raises, and to put together an EB-5 compliant program. Over my career, I've structured over $12 billion in EB-5 deals. I've served on the AILA EB-5 committee. I co-authored the book, What Every Lawyer Needs to Know About Immigration Law, And I've also authored a number of chapters in the Investors and Entrepreneurs book by the American Immigration Lawyers Association, as well as a number of articles. In terms of what we're seeing in the market, investors are very interested again in EB-5 since the program was reauthorized in May of 2022. It's still one of the easiest ways to get a green card in the United States. You get to self-sponsor yourself and your family for green cards. And there's a number of very good, very attractive projects in the market. And one of the things that investors really like is that under the new EB-5 law, if they're in the United States, they can concurrently file their EB-5 petition and their green card application. And by virtue of doing that, they can get work authorization and travel authorization, and that's something that's very attractive to them. Another revision within the new EB-5 law was the introduction of the concept of special visa categories that get priority. And EB-5AN has a number of projects in those categories, and that's something that investors are very interested in because the processing times are much faster than they were under the old EB-5 program. And that's something that has really revived and re-energized the EB-5 market. In terms of partial filings, we've been filing cases that have partial investments for the past 15 years. They're routinely approved. And it's important if you're interested in doing the EB-5 application to get your application in before the filing fee increase. And a partial filing, if you can't do a full one, is a great way to get you to that goal of locking in at the current price and then later supplementing the application, which we will discuss later on in the presentation on how to do it.
Great, thank you, Kate. Rohit, do you want to jump in and share a few words about your partial filings today?
Sure. My name is Rohit Kapuria. I'm a partner at Saul Ewing, also co-chair of our Global Immigration Foreign Investment Practice Group. Saul Ewing is not as big as Greenberg. We have, I believe, 20 offices with right under 500 attorneys. But specific to EB-5, we have a substantial amount of experience, done about $10 billion worth of EB-5 transactions on the corporate securities and the immigration platform, as well as represented a few thousand investors over the years. But specific to this platform and what we're discussing today, EB-5 has seen a lot of revisions, as Kate mentioned, and remains quite popular. So depending on where most of our audience is coming from, we've seen a number of changes within the investor composition in the last 2 years. And so I imagine that some of the folks attending today are located here in the United States. They may be on F1 visas, they may be here on L1, H1, whatever that structure looks like. And if they happen to be born in mainland China or they happen to be born in India, then they're well aware of what the backlogs are under the other employment-based categories that they have so far availed themselves of. So we will be describing some of the positives on this webinar as to how to go about the concurrent processing, as Kate was discussing, and more particularly how to make this within the short sprint that is now going to be taking place over the next 45 odd days if you want to do the partial filing before the fees increase. Because across the board, while you investors are facing the pinch of the additional fee increase, the projects themselves are also seeing a very, very large increase on their end. So it's not as if USCIS is targeting one group over the other. This is across the board. Majority of the EB-5 of the immigration processes are seeing fee increases. So unfortunately, we are where we are, but let's see if we can assist you today on this webinar.
Perfect. Thank you, Rohit. All right. So Kate kind of talked a little bit about partial EB-5 investments earlier, but Rohit, Can you kind of walk us through, what is a partial investment? Why is it allowed? And kind of what the legal theory is behind, a partial investment being acceptable, and kind of what the history has been.
Sure. So partial filings have always been permissible. The law has originally stated and continues to state that an investor must have invested or, quote, be in the process of investing. And so from that standpoint, the idea is if an investor is in the process of investing and has made a certifiable commitment to actually make that's defensible, then they can avail of the benefits of the concurrent filing if they happen to be here in the United States, or if they haven't, then they will have to essentially wait until the I-526E petition is adjudicated. Now, while the law states that the investor can be in the process of investing, there's also the practical item here. So you either have, on the one end, an investor who's willing to make the full investment amount of $800,000 if the project location qualifies, or $1,050,000 if the project location does not qualify. Or in the other spectrum, you have investors who are in the process of investing, where they can put in a portion of it now and then a portion afterwards. Now, each project is going to have its own stipulation as to what that timeline looks like. So Mike and Zan can sort of discuss what they're doing on their element, but generally speaking, there will be a deadline by which the investor must put in the balance portion. This could be extended, yes, but if you don't make that balance, then you will be subject to more than likely a request for evidence where USCIS comes back and says, okay, we understand that you put in X value. We also see that you entered into an agreement with the EB-5 issuer for the balance on XYZ date. Have you done it or have you not done it? We'll talk about what an interfile means in a bit, but that's sort of what the requirement ends up being. But for the benefit of the investor, if you do it, what will happen is, number one, you start the clock because you can get in earlier. Number two, you can also avail yourself of the benefit of concurrent adjustment of status if you happen to be here and you're eligible for it. And number three, you get in line quicker because if you are from a country that is subject to potential backlog, then you get ahead of the line versus someone else who makes the investment much later. So there are all the reasons why it's beneficial, but there are also some negatives and cons that we will need to consider, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. Back to you, Sam.
Got it. Thank you, Rohit. Kate, could you talk a little bit about the commitment aspect of funding the balance of the investment? Why is that important? And how does the timing of that kind of factor into this person's immigration process if they decide to do a partial?
Sure. So this is critical. You have to be able to fulfill the full investment for the EB-5 to be approved. And if you can't, it will not be approved. You can be in the process of investing according to the regulations, as Rohit said, at the time of filing, but by the time that it comes up for adjudication, you have to have invested the full amount. So what typically happens is the government checks in one of two ways. One is you can proactively plan on when you will make your second or third installment. Most regional centers require it to be paid in 2 installments. And you can proactively interfile proof that you made the investment for the application to be adjudicated. The interfiling doesn't always make it to the file. We're dealing with a government agency that gets thousands and thousands of filings every day. Its mailroom is staffed by contractors, not adjudicating officers. And in some cases, the interfiling doesn't make the file. In that case, the USCIS will send a request for evidence. We call that an RFE. And in that request for evidence, they will want to see proof that the full EB-5 investment has been made. so that they can approve the application. And at the point they send that RFE, we either resubmit the documents that we prepared for the interfiling, or if the interfiling was not made, at that point, we work with the investor to get the documentation to show that they made the full EB-5 investment. But this is the critical prong that needs to be met for this EB-5 petition to be approved. So if you do not have a sure way to fund the EB-5 investment, you have to really consider, is it worth for me to apply now?
Got it. And just to clarify there, that the funding of the balance, that's money that's being made available typically in the project's escrow account, and it's not a requirement that that money has to be fully invested in the project, immediately at the 526E stage, but just that you have to have made the whole investment and made it available, in the project's escrow account typically.
Correct.
Got it. Okay. All right. So that's a good start. So Rohit, I guess explaining a little bit more around the timing, what are you seeing in the market in terms of, timelines that you're comfortable with for an investor to commit to fund the balance? And how does that kind of interact with these faster processing times that we're seeing, particularly for rural projects?
So one thing that the investors always have to understand is the use of the underlying capital, and what the EB-5 issuer has in terms of its loan agreement or equity agreement with the underlying job creating entity or developer, however we term it, depending on the situation. In majority of the circumstances, there is a period within which the EB-5 issuer, the entity in which you are investing, will need to make the full capital contribution downstream to them, so that the project can then utilize the capital, and then we can show that it was used for job creation purposes. Now, there are different structures. Every project that you're going to face is going to have its own business plan, economic impact report. It will have its own disclosures as to how that's stipulated. But by and large, as the EB-5 entities are filling up, they will be looking in terms of priority as to who to take, right? Because they want to intake the capital, lend it downstream to the developer. The developer is already on a schedule because perhaps they're already in construction. And so they're not going to wait forever to get this other portion of EB-5 money. So it's very important that the investor understand what the deal requires, so that they can better negotiate, if there is even an ability to negotiate, what that term looks like. What we have here on the slide of being able to commit between 6 to 12 months does seem to be the norm. There are some projects that require shorter periods though. And the reason they require shorter periods is there's very high demand. And so it's sort of a first come, first serve perspective. There are also a lot of projects, and I know Mike and Sam, you guys also have these, where they're filling up really quickly. And so the preference would be for those who are able to fund the full amount today, because the need by the borrower is immediate, as opposed to some other projects where the need may be much more extended, and therefore there's a little bit more flexibility on timelines. What needs to be done, however, as the investor is going through the process, their immigration attorney has to be comfortable with what that structure looks like. There is, and we'll discuss this in a few slides, there is a requirement that we demonstrate with good faith what our source of funds looks like. And it's very different if you're doing a source of funds analysis and a path of funds analysis on a full $800,000 investment today, versus if you're doing one on a portion today and then a portion or two in the next 6 to 12 months, because that's a different scope of work. So these are all things that we have to take into account, and the investor should discuss that with their attorney before venturing down this path.
Yep, all good thoughts. All right, so we'll shift gears a little bit and talk about the impact of doing a partial investment on the various applications, particularly for those investors who are looking at doing the concurrent filing option. So Kate, can you walk us through these and talk a little bit specifically about interfiling? What is an interfiling and how does that work mechanically as you go through these?
So I'll back up a little bit and talk about what needs to be included in the Form I-526E.
Yep,
so
great.
When an investor files an EB-5 petition, that's the actual Form I-526E, they have to include information about where their investment comes from. So we have to explain the source of the investment, where were the funds earned, and then we have to show the movement of the money from the time it was earned all the way through until investment with the new commercial enterprise. And that's the fund that Sam referenced before that has been created that acts as a funding vehicle to a development project. So this requires a lot of documentation, and particularly under the new law, it requires 7 years of tax returns. It requires documentation in extensive detail regarding the source of funds. So when we're doing a partial investment, what do? We still submit that information for the amount of money that we are investing at the time. And the partial investment, obviously every regional center, every investment you select will have their own criteria for the minimum that they will take. Say it's 100,000, 200, 300, 4,000, or 400,000, we have to provide source of funds documents to show where that initial investment comes from. We also, when we prepare an application, we explain where the second portion of the funding will come from. We may or may not submit evidence to show where that money is at the time of filing the initial application. It's really a case-to-case determination. Most times, investors will have some documentation and they can explain, well, my money is in real estate and I need time to sell it. Or my money is coming to me from the sale of stock, but I need time to get it. Or I have the money, it's secured, but there's currency restrictions in my home country. And so it's going to take me time to transfer it out, right? This is very common, for example, with Indian nationals. They can transfer a portion in 1 year, and then they may have to wait for the second year to make another transfer. So we will typically mention in the initial filing. And then, as I said, we prepare an interfiling once the second investment, the second installment has been made to detail the source and trace of funds. If that information is not readily available, then we wait for the request for evidence from the USCIS. Now, as the slide correctly notes, that can cause somewhat of a delay in the adjudication of the Form I-526E, because whenever you're asking them to review something that you haven't submitted initially, it takes time. You know, they send a request for evidence, we submit the response, the case has to, again, resume processing with the immigration agency. But I don't think it's a significant delay in adjudication. It's minor, but keep that in mind. Now, as I mentioned before, for investors filing in the United States, the new law created the ability for the first time in the EB-5 category to file the adjustment of status concurrently with the EB-5 petition. The adjustment of status is the actual green card application for the investor, their spouse, and any children under 21. And the benefit of filing an adjustment is that it gives you the ability to remain in the United States. So for example, if you're here as a tourist, if you're here as an F1 student, and your status is expiring, but you want to remain here, the first day you file your adjustment, you are now in a period of authorized stay by the Attorney General to remain in the United States. The same applies for H's or L's. You can maintain your H or L status, or you can let it go after you file the adjustment. It's up to you. And as part of filing the adjustment of status, you're also allowed to file for work authorization, called an EAD card, and travel authorization, called an advance parole. So individuals in certain status if they're filing from a B or an F, they will not be able to travel internationally until they get that advance parole document. If you're an H-1B or an L-1 and you're filing the adjustment of status, in certain cases, the government will also not issue the advance parole to you as long as you have a valid H or L visa. But as soon as that visa expires, you're also eligible to apply for the advance parole. And the partial filing or the partial investment or the full investment has absolutely no impact on getting an EAD or an AP. They're adjudicated completely separately. So the timing on those will not be delayed at all, whether you choose to do a full or partial investment.
Rohit, anything else you want to add on that before we move over to pros and cons generally?
No, Kate explained it really well.
Okay, so now we've kind of covered a little bit of the advantages, disadvantages, but now we're going to kind of synthesize everything and put it all up in one spot. So Rohit, do you want to walk us through the pros, and then Kate, do you want to cover the cons as well?
Sure. So the biggest pro here is getting your place in line and also what we deem here to be the priority date. It's something that we're seeing is extremely important, particularly for foreign nationals, well, all foreign nationals, but for EB-5 investors that are born in India or born in mainland China. From their perspective, we know that given the surge in demand, at some point this priority date issue is going to be something that's going to be more of our focus. At the moment, the good news is for both individuals, mainland China as well as born in India, it is current. And so the ability to file and apply for concurrent adjustment of status at the moment is key for us. Subsequent to that, the other element that's very helpful is we have a reduction in cost. We know that there is an increase in the investment amount. You guys are all familiar with it for the April 1 deadline. So what you'll be doing is getting ahead of the additional fees that you would have to pay on the I-526E as well as on the adjustment of status if you are here. But unfortunately, if you are abroad, then you're not really going to be able to do much more than that as we get downstream. So fortunately on the DS-260, we're not really seeing much of anything. The 829 is an additional fee that you will have to deal with. But what's important for those that are bound by remittance restrictions, there are two things that you can look at. One, it's fees that you don't have to try and figure out how to remit the money, because we know that most investors that are remitting the money from countries that have these restrictions, they have to jump through a lot of hoops in order to remit the 800,000 plus the administrative fee. So lower USCIS fees is slightly lower headache there. But two, for certain countries such as India, which have now imposed the 20% TCS tax, you're also saving some money on the government element up there. So that's all the beneficial components that you want. And then the third part is, as we're dealing with flexibility or risk mitigation, we look at the flexibility because it's something that you can avail yourself now, you get in line, and you don't necessarily have to worry about getting the full amount today. But as Kate is going to talk about on the con section, the source of funds and the path of funds are still very critical. And there is a lot more work to be done on that element. So even though there's a flexibility of moving forward, you still have to be sure that you understand where the balance of your capital is coming from. So I'll let Kate jump into that point.
Thank you. So cons. There's no official policy, as we said. The regulations say you have to be in the process of investing when you file your EB-5 petition. But since the new law was passed in May of 2022, the Reform and Integrity Act, we haven't had the government issue new regulations implementing that law. So we have sort of no adjudication policy on paying in installments based on the new legislation. And so we may get questions from USCIS when we submit an interfiling or we have to respond to an RFE on paying in installments, asking questions possibly that we haven't been asked before, and we have to be prepared to answer them. Why did you pay in installments? There may be detailed questions on the source and the trace of the funds. And so the investor and the attorney will have to really work hand in hand to prepare a strong response. Second of all, investor support. Obviously, when you're paying in installments, investors can often require support and flexibility from developers and regional centers, and that may not always be available. Every regional center sort of sets their own investment criteria for their projects, and some of it is definitely dictated by the capital needs of the project and the developer. And so not everybody accepts or will entertain the payment of an EB-5 investment in several installments over time. And that is an important threshold issue that needs to be asked at the outset. Second of all, the EB-5 unit of the USCIS released new guidance with respect to how long investment needs to be sustained. And that policy guidance said that it has to be sustained for a 2-year period, but it won't begin for investors who are paying in installments until the final payment is made and spent by the EB-5 project. So you may find yourself in a situation where your funds are invested longer into the project, and also they may need to potentially be redeployed into another project to meet the 2-year sustainment period. Finally, every attorney, of course, in the United States sets their own fee agreements, has their own schedules, and when they're required to do additional work, like respond to an RFE or make an interfiling, they may be charging additional fees to investors, and that is something that you should also consider. Thank you, Sam.
If I may just add in on that point, one other element which many times investors may not fully appreciate. If there's an installment structure, and just using hypothetical examples, you have $200,000 that's being sourced, and you indicate, well, the balance is going to come, we think it's from this source or that source or the other source. Things are going to change. And there is quite a bit of work that goes into the sourcing and the movement of funds. So it's not as simple as you enter into a fixed fee agreement with your attorney and say, look, I'm going to pay you this legal fee amount, and it's going to cover not only the first installment, but the second and the third, and you have to do all of this work for things that may, come up in the future. Legal fee discussions are very tricky, but there's a practical effect. The attorney is trying to assist, has to do an inordinate amount of work just trying to source all of that. So if you go partial, be aware that there will be more than likely additional legal fees because the attorney has to do more work as they're moving down the path. It's not something to be taken lightly either.
Got it. Okay, so both of you have worked on many partial filings over the years. So what are some of the most common investor profiles that you see for partial investors that you've seen in the past, and that you're a couple of weeks leading up to this fee increase?
Well, I think
you want to go first and I can go?
Sure. I think capital controls are something that really comes up frequently. There's many countries who limit the amount of money that investors can transfer out of the country any given year. India, Vietnam, China, countries in the Middle East, we deal with this quite frequently. And sometimes investors may also need to involve their friends and family in the transfer of funds overseas. And that, especially if you're dealing with a country that caps in investment transfers at 50,000, it may take time to get the money out. And so that is very common. I'd say that's the number one scenario that we see. And of course, as I mentioned before, selling real estate is also very, very common. And right now, we've sort of been on a roller coaster ride worldwide with respect to real estate prices, interest rates, and how much you can actually sell at. And, you know, both in the US and also overseas in many countries that we deal with. And so investors may not be ready to invest the full amount because they're waiting to sell their property. But this is also something that, as we mentioned before, you really need to evaluate. You have to be sure that no matter what the conditions are, you're going to sell that property in time to be able to make the second installment and document it to the U.S. Immigration Agency. And it's the same situation with an asset sale. Restricted stock units that can only be redeemed during certain dates. That's also something that's commonly seen. We also have instances where individuals, particularly adult children, get gifts from their parents, and the parent may be waiting for some sort of funding to come in, whether it's salary, whether it's the sale of real estate. And so sometimes they're dependent on that parent, and that's where the delay and the need for the installment comes in. Rohit, I don't know if you have anything to add here. I imagine you do.
No, actually, I don't. So it's a very good breakdown there.
Perfect. All right, so let's flip the coin and talk about, you know, what profile of investors should not consider.
Sam, I think you broke in and out, so I didn't quite hear everything you said.
You cut out, but yeah, I'd say that this is probably one of the questions that I get most often is like, so who's a bad candidate for partial? Like, what are the people, who are the people that it just doesn't make sense for them to try and do a partial before this April deadline or at all, because their situations just are not approvable or the right fit? And maybe Rohit, if you want, you can start with this one.
So, a lot of what we do in EB-5 unfortunately comes through dictates or mandates that we see through requests for evidence or notices of intent to deny. The EB-5 policy itself is baked into the USCIS policy manual, but it doesn't necessarily give us all the answers. And so from time to time, when we get requests for evidence, then we understand where the adjudicators appear to be going in terms of their thinking. In many instances, if an investor comes to me today and says they want to do partial, what I always try to do up front, if at all possible, is source the entire bucket. We like to be able to present to the government where the full $800,000 with the administrative fee, because we have to source that too, is coming from. It's not always doable, but the idea is we want to present to the government at least a path and an explanation of what they will be seeing in a form of an interfiling sometime in the near future. That's the first point. The second point, if we do go down that path, what I also warn the investor about is if we are doing that, we want to be able to ensure that that balance is coming from what that second portion of capital is. And it's not something that we're going to subsequently change. We don't want a situation where we say, hey, the balance comes from a sale of asset located at, the corner of X and Y, but then 6 months later, that sale doesn't happen, and then they have to scramble and get it from a different source that we haven't actually done, and then we have to go back to the government and say, well, we told you this, but that didn't happen, so here is where it's coming from. So that's not a very good fit. Secondarily, if it's going to come from future earnings, while that is a good defensible source, we have seen RFEs, and there's obviously good documentation in the policy manual to back this up, that it's something that is potential, it's not guaranteed, and we don't know. The government could come back and say, well, how did you know that this was actually a good source? Because what if you lost your job? And it doesn't make it seem like as if you are actually going to, with good intentions, be in the process of investing. It does fit the mold, but I warn clients against doing that. You're relying on your salary for the next 6 months, or you're relying on a potential bonus, the government usually says that's a weak case. So it works, but I would stay away from that if at all possible. And then, the last that we have in here is if we're taking a high interest loan. Well, in the current lending structure, loans in this particular environment are very difficult. They're also very expensive. So if you're taking something with very punitive interest and in turn getting a return on your EB-5, which necessarily is going to be much lower, may not be the best fit. So those are things that we usually advise clients. I'm sure there are a few I'm not thinking of off the top of my head, but not every case works.
I would add here that also, if you're relying on someone else to give you funds, relationships change. We've had clients that file an EB-5 and then something happens in the relationship and they may even get divorced. So if the money is not in your possession or something that you own at the outset, you should really think twice if this is the correct scenario for you.
Perfect.
I think that's a very good point.
Yep. Thank you, guys. Okay, so now let's walk through this entire timeline. Kate, do you want to kind of start out and walk us through this, and then Rohit kind of jump in and talk about the inner filing too and how that would work and all those mechanics?
Sure. So any EB-5 application always starts with meeting the two prongs, source of funds and selection of project. Need to get that done right away. So you do not have a lot of time to file by April 1st, and any attorney that you're going to work with is going to tell you we have to focus on getting this documentation together. Once you select the EB-5 project, then that part is really sort of taken care of from there by the attorney in terms of getting the template, the project documents, and the project will also be, or the regional center will be emailing directly to have you execute the subbook and the requisite documents. The investor at this point should really be focused on preparation of the source of funds, and we talked about what that entails. So if you're selling, in this example, Amazon stock, as soon as you decide on a project, start getting your documentation together of how did you make the money to buy that Amazon stock, liquidate that Amazon stock, sell it so that you have the money to make the initial investment and fund, and then you can file your EB-5 petition before the April 1st deadline. Now, as soon as that EB-5 petition is filed, especially if you're going into a project that is already approved, that is perhaps in one of the priority visa categories, a rural project perhaps or not, or it's a TEA project but it's gotten approval already, those cases are reviewed and adjudicated quickly by the USCIS. So you should begin right away at month 3 getting together the funds to make the second installment. So in this case, you are preparing HELOC, you have the funds available in order to fund by month 6. But as you're getting those funds together, you're working with the attorney to put together the documentation also to show the source and the trace of the funds. And then either you get an RFE or you interfile and you submit the documentation to the USCIS at month 6.
Got it. Got it. Okay. Rohit, can you talk a little bit about the inner filing and just what the mechanics, how that can be additional work and how that gets done in terms of the additional sourcing?
So if we don't understand at the time we do the original filing where the balance of capital is coming from, then the same type of work that Kate was just describing, we would need to do the second time around or a third time around. It will include a combination of where is the capital coming from, how does it hit the petitioner's bank account, and from there, how does it flow down to the escrow agent for the project, if there is one, and then eventually then going to USCIS and either doing an electronic upload via an interfile if we have any access to a USCIS account, which, mind you, does not always work. Or we also do a physical filing to USCIS. Now, whether or not the interfile makes it to the appropriate file, where eventually an adjudicator, when they pick up the I-526E petition, will have a copy of both the original as well as the interfile, is up for question. Unfortunately, the system, while it does look like it's better today, it still doesn't function 100%. So it's very possible that the attorney may do an interfile and has all the documents which exceed a certain number, and that's where the online process is not bulletproof. And when the adjudicator does review it, they will issue an RFP on things that were already submitted, let's say 6 months before. So investors should just be prepared that may be a case where an RFP comes, and it may include additional questions that were resolved in the interfile, but it would not simply be, here's a copy USCIS of what we interfiled in response. The attorney has to actually sit down and respond to the RFP point by point, and still also include that evidence and distill it in a brief format.
Got it. Okay. I think this is a good point to bring in a couple of questions that we've got from some of the attendees. So one of them, Rohit, let's say that I was planning to fund the balance from a HELOC on a property, but then changed my mind, or I got some money from some other source, and I decided that I want to use another source to fund the outstanding balance. Is that okay? Not okay? Going to be problematic? How would you deal with that situation?
It depends on what we put in the original I-526E petition. Now, is there something inherently wrong with changing your mind on where the source is? No. But if we went into great depth to explain the mortgage and how it was secured and what the subsequent HELOC would look like, but then now we're completely changing what that source and path of funds looks like, then there is more weakness attached to the case. Am I saying that we can't overcome it? No, we possibly could, and you have a right to make that change, but then we have to deal with an adjudicator who may give us a pass or may not give us a pass. If the investor has the thought process that they may change it, then I would prefer to be vague upfront when we're doing it. But of course, that's just my stylistic preference. Another attorney may choose to do it differently.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. Let's see what other questions we've got. We talked about how an EAD or advanced parole are not impacted at all with a decision to do a partial filing. So that's good to know. What if the situation is such that there's going to be a future gift that's anticipated that will receive that gift at the time they file the original I-526E petition? Kate, how would you approach that situation?
I'm sorry, you broke up a little bit. So there's a gift that's anticipated and they don't get it, or they do?
There's a gift that's anticipated, but the gift isn't going to come in until a few months after the I-526E gets submitted with a partial investment to start.
Well, I think that's fine. As long as you're sure that the gift is coming, I think that's the biggest sort of variable there, that we don't want circumstances to change. But if you're sure that you're getting a gift and the person that's giving you the gift understands that they not only have to give you the gift, but they're going to have to give you the documentation required to source and trace the gift, their own financials, and possibly their own tax returns to evidence the gift, and they're okay with that, then that's perfectly permissible.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. Let's see what other questions we've got here. Okay, so one other question we have is related to future earnings. So let's say similar situation to the gift. but now there's an expectation of, a large bonus, right? Or future salary payments that are going to be coming in. How is that kind of the same situation, or do you think that would be looked at differently?
I think it's okay, but again, you have to really be sure you're getting that salary. So if you have a contract in place with your employer and they're obligated to pay it, and you can't be terminated without receiving that payment, that seems like a sure thing. But it's a very difficult economic climate right now, and anything can sort of happen. And so I would be very sure that you're going to receive that salary. And the same thing with the bonus. Is the bonus discretionary or is it guaranteed? Is there a contract that locks it into place? Obviously, certain companies give employment contracts and they can also guarantee bonuses even in the case of termination. But unless you have something like that in place, you may not want to, as Rohit said, describe it in the initial I-526E filing, because circumstances can change and you may end up using a different source of funds. So you should really work closely with your attorney, discuss these issues, and if there's a risk that you need to change your source of funds, which we have done and we've done it successfully, but it's just another hurdle to clear, you may not want to detail it in the initial filing.
Got it. Okay. I think now would be a good time to hear from both of you, maybe Rohit first and then Kate, just about what the process would look like, for clients in attendance today who are considering doing a partial investment. What would the next month look like in terms of, how much time would they need to be available, document preparation, what does that kind of next month look like? And then in terms of targeting, printing and submitting the file, given that this is a paper filing, kind of walk us through what that would look like, for a client considering to work with you, Kate, first, and then Rohit as well.
So what I would say is you should try to retain an immigration attorney within the next week and a half, because you really need to pull together a lot of documentation. These are fulsome filings. They require a lot of detail. And so, you need to get in contact with an immigration attorney. For anyone interested in speaking with us, obviously we offer a gratis consultation to anyone who comes from EB-5AN. And once you engage the attorney, I would request, our protocol is to immediately send a questionnaire and a list of documents so you can begin collecting your documentation for the source of funds. At the same time, you need to choose that EB-5 project, execute the necessary documentation with them, and discuss the issue of the installments with them to make sure that it's acceptable. And if it is, you need to take the next steps to move forward, make the investment, and get that EB-5 petition filed before April 1st to lock in that lower filing fee price.
Got it. And Rohit, go ahead. Tell us kind of how that looks like for you, and obviously similar, but yeah, what else would you add to that?
There's a lot of similarities there. I think the key is working also backwards, understanding what our timeline is. We're trying to get in with a filing before April 1, which is a Monday. And so that's when the actual that's when the fee increase takes place. So you need to file before that, and it has to be postmarked, the appropriate date. So what you don't want is a situation where an investor says, okay, well, I can get this done, call it March 28th is my deadline, and then everything gets mailed out. No, you don't want to be in that type of position. You need to start moving much quicker than that, because every attorney that participates in EB-5 is going to be inundated as we're getting towards the end of March. And at that point, you have to account for, issues with mailing, because if there is bad weather, the FedEx could get delayed. You have to also account for, printers breaking down, things that are just very common human issues that will occur. Large firms like Greenberg, Torrig, and Saul Ewing, fortunately, we have lots and lots of those type of printers and lots of people that can assist, large teams, but it doesn't mean that it's going to be, 100% bulletproof. So it's a situation where the investor has to be heavily involved right away and really moving the needle and getting the documents quickly, because the quicker you move as an investor, the quicker your attorney can move. So it's not as if we send a checklist next week and then we don't hear back till the first week of March with some information. But of course, as we're getting the information, we know we have to keep digging and digging and digging. And if we want to make a filing, we have to make it as bulletproof as possible.
Got it. Okay, perfect. All right. Now before we wrap up, we'll spend a few minutes just chatting about some of our current projects, and particularly what the delta is between those in terms of rural versus non-rural as well. So currently we have 5 EB-5 projects open for investment today. 3 of them are rural and 2 of them are non-rural and are considered urban high unemployment. So in general, if you make an investment in any of these projects, the investment is going to be the $800,000. There's no difference in the investment amount across. Since all countries are current on the visa bulletin for the concurrent filing, if you're in the United States already, as Rohit mentioned earlier, on F1, TN, H1B, E2, etc., then you'll be able to adjust your status immediately and qualify for the EAD, the flexible work permit, and the advanced parole travel document. And we're seeing those get issued between 60 and 120 days. So those terms are applicable for any of these projects. The difference is that in the rural projects, you're going to get faster I-526C approval. So the government is going to review, adjudicate your application faster, and there are more visas set aside. 20% of the total visas are set aside for rural project investors, and that's really only applicable to those investors who are born in higher volume countries like India or China. So stepping back, there's 2 steps to collect the green card. Step 1, I-526C approval. Government reviews your application. They make sure you're not a criminal, you're not a terrorist, and your source of funds is valid, right? And you can show the legal source of all the money. That's step 1. Step 2 is there has to be a visa available for you to go and collect. And that's determined by the monthly State Department visa bulletin, which is current now for all countries. But in the future, it's very likely that for investors who are born in India or China, if they invest today, they're most likely going to face a delay in that second step of the process if they choose a non-rural EB-5 project. So that's important to keep in mind just generally as kind of your framework for how to evaluate these different projects. So first, with respect to rural projects, Mike, do you want to walk us through the rural projects, and I can talk about the urban projects?
Yeah, absolutely. And part of the reason, just stepping back, why we have 5 different deals available right now is because after the passage of the RIA and some new policy guidance from USCIS on repayment timelines, it's not one size fits all for investors anymore. There's different priorities that investors have. Rural with the set-asides and faster processing. Some investors are looking for higher return equity deals where there might be a little bit more risk. Other investors want the fastest repayment of money and don't mind if they get caught in a visa backlog because they can adjust status. There's just lots of different considerations that investors have, and we have tried to tailor multiple deals for whatever investors' priorities are, because it just isn't the case anymore where there's a perfect deal that meets the top criteria of every investor. So the 3 rural deals that we have, the first one is Twin Lakes, Georgia. This is a large single-family home development, 1,300 homes that's being built right outside of Atlanta, 1 county over from the MSA. So it qualifies as rural. And this deal's been going on for several years. They've already sold over 600 of the houses. So an extremely successful project. You can go and visit and see hundreds of homes built and being lived in, and they have hundreds more to build. So this is a very common sense project when you go there and see they're building a product that is being bought and received well. The next project that we have is the Kindred Resort at Keystone. So this is the newest rural deal that we launched. It's an under construction condominium and hotel development situated right on the main gondola of the Keystone Resort, which is one of the closest resorts to Denver and one of the busiest ski resorts in the country. It's an amazing parcel. They've already pre-sold 70% of the condos, and they've created enough jobs for all the EB-5 investors to date. We were just out there a couple weeks ago visiting the project, and this one is a very simple structure where the EB-5 is mezzanine debt now, but will become senior upon condo closings. So really easy to understand collateral story. The last rural deal, and this one is nearly full. It is full, but we have a few wires left, is the Wahali project. The key highlight of this one is that this is the first rural deal that we brought to market, and we have I-526Es already approved on this deal. So this is a large neighborhood project as well, much earlier on the Twin Lakes deal, but it's a golf course higher end neighborhood. They've completed the golf course, which opens for play this summer. They've delivered the first amenity building and already sold over 20 of the phase one lots. So it's moving along well, and there's a couple EB-5 spots left in there if anybody's ready to move quickly. And just a great deal as well because we have the 956F approved on that specific project and 526Es. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Sam to run through the two TEA projects that we have that are a little bit different in structure.
Yep, thanks, Mike. So for investors who are already in the United States who can qualify for the concurrent filing, these two Boynton Beach projects are likely potentially a better fit. This is an apartment project being developed by Coulter, with whom we've done more than 20 EB-5 projects over the last 10 years. Coulter, they're also the developer of the Twin Lakes, Georgia project. They've done almost 200 projects, more than 25 billion in development over almost 30 years. They've never failed to repay a loan. They've never failed to complete a project ever. So very blue chip developer, immaculate reputation. And this project is a 210 unit multifamily apartment project. So the business plan is build the building, rent it out, and then sell the whole building to a single strategic buyer. There are two different offerings for this project. One is equity with a very high 5% return. And then the second one is a more traditional EB-5 loan, which is secured by a parent company guarantee. One of the things that makes our EB-5 loans, in addition to the security of the funds going into the project, so providing a separate repayment guarantee from a parent holding company, which diversifies the risk of the EB-5 investment and complies with USCIS at-risk rules and requirements. And it essentially means that instead of investing in a single stock, you're basically investing in an index fund. You're diversified across a portfolio of projects that Coulter controls. And so your risk is spread out instead of being 100% concentrated in a single project, like is the case with most EB-5 projects. So the Boynton Beach project gives investors an opportunity to have their capital back a bit sooner. The project timeline is going to be a little bit faster than some of the others. And on the equity side, the return is also substantially higher. But again, as we discussed earlier, because the Boynton project is not in a rural area, it's going to take longer for the green card. And that is going to be more amplified for investors from higher volume countries like India and China. So those are all factors to keep in mind. And you really need to just think about, what do I want to prioritize? Getting the green card as fast as possible, having access to my capital back as soon as possible, security of the capital. Those are all the different items that are available, different features. And so you've just got to kind of internally decide, you're important, and then try to optimize and select the project that best meets those criteria. Mike, anything else on that?
No, I'd say that all of these have passed our diligence criteria. We're the manager on all of these and have complete comfort in them. Just a little bit different style in the priorities for them. And yeah, we're excited to have all of these available before this April 1st deadline. I'm sure that a lot of investors will move forward. So I'd say reach out to us directly and we can run through more of the detailed offering materials for investors.
Yep, and we can accept a partial filing on any of these projects with flexible commitment terms. So that won't be an issue if you are trying to file before the upcoming deadline and want to start with less than the entire $800,000 amount. We can definitely accommodate that. So please feel free to reach out to us directly. Best way to get in touch is to send us an email or just schedule a call on our site. And I'll leave it, Kate, do you want to share a few little words of imparting advice, wisdom, and then Rohit before we wrap up for the day?
Of course, thank you. So I think it's important to move quickly here. Find a solid EB-5 project. You just heard about 5 very good ones, but you need to find a solid EB-5 project and then pull your documentation as quickly as possible together for filing. It's going to be critical to get that application in to take advantage of the timeline and the lower price. It can be done, but you have to really work together with your attorney, with the regional center and the project you select to make it happen by April 1st. And, you know, it's completely doable, but you have to really start the work as soon as possible.
Rohit, go ahead.
While you're moving quickly, also take the time to determine whether or not you fit the mold and are willing to wait and go through the process. You do not want to have buyer's remorse after putting down a substantial amount in the first instance, and then subsequently decide that you want to change your mind and do something else, because you will be bound by the terms of the limited partnership agreement or the operating agreement. And in most instances, understand that your capital will more than likely be utilized while you are waiting to fund the balance. Every deal is going to have a different stipulation as to what they're doing, but it's not as simple as you put it down and you're buying something from one of the large retailers and then you'll just get a refund because you change your mind. This is a serious investment. EB-5 is an investment. And you're subject to all the rules and regulations that surround it, and you're also bound by the terms of an operating agreement or within partnership agreement.
And one other point I'd just like to make as well here before we wrap up is just that, like, this is going to require a significant amount of time and effort, right? You're not just going to log into one bank account, download a few statements, and then submit that, and then that. There is going to be a significant amount of time required by both any investor and the immigration attorney over the next 4 to 6 weeks to get this application together. This is almost like a miniature audit of capital that you've accumulated over time from various sources, and it is going to be a significant time commitment. With that in mind, it's really important to work with an immigration attorney who has a lot of experience working with investors who are similar to you, who have done this before, hundreds of times, and also work with someone that you like, right? Like, you're going to be interacting with them a lot at odd hours. This is a multi-year relationship. EB-5 is not, just a 1-week exercise and then that's it. Things change over time. There may be additional children, there may be death, divorce. Things are going to happen over a multi-year time frame. And so you want to make sure you're working with someone that you like, you enjoy interacting with, you have confidence, in their ability to get you the right advice and, give you the right guidance at different points in the process. And Kate and Rohit, we've been working with them for many, many years. They're very well respected in the space. They have our strongest endorsement. It's just, personality fit, timing, and availability. As Kate mentioned earlier, there is a large rush happening right now, and all of the best EB-5 attorneys, their calendars are going to get full over the next 4 to 6 weeks. And so, it's really important to get started earlier because then you won't be rushing at the very end. Mike, anything else before we wrap up?
No, I think that's great. And just key takeaway is get started early. Lock in your attorney. At some point, they're not going to be taking new clients. Get moving, and it's possible to do it by April 1st, but be proactive.
Yep, exactly. All right, great. Thank you both, Kate and Rohit, for taking the time. We know you're busy. We really appreciate it. And yeah, for any investors who are considering, doing a filing in the next 6-7 weeks, please reach out directly to both Kate and Rohit. Their contact details are on the screen. Any of our projects, terms, investment period, all of that, please feel free to email us, or you can send me a text or WhatsApp at that number, 561-386-5356, and I can get you links and all the information that you need. And last item is we are hosting an in-person visit at our Twin Lakes Rural Project on Saturday, March 16th. Completely free of charge, private tour of the project, meet with the Coulter team, myself and Mike will be there in person as well to meet you. So if that's of interest, please reach out and we can get you the registration details for that. So again, thank you, Kate and Roy. We appreciate your time today.